A 1975 movie about a shark emptied beaches and filled theatres. Killer seafood was suddenly big business. We should of course clarify, by killer seafood we mean movies about stroppy sea life that would kick off a franchise, and not the bad shellfish that you had for lunch that would kick off a week of living off white rice and Imodium.
We look at the picture and make up our own minds.
The sequels to Jaws.
Well, she's got the idea in her head that the shark that killed Martin and Sean is following the family.
Jaws was originally a best-selling novel by Peter Benchley before it was adapted into Steven Spielberg's first major hit film. That 1975 movie was a masterclass in how to make a thriller about a killer shark that did not feel like a cheesy horror film. Its huge success made the director a household name, made the film's leads into stars, and also turned John Williams from a talented gigging composer into a movie score deity.
It's a Carcharodon carcharius. It's a great white.
The film changed people's perceptions of sharks from something to be mindful of after you went scuba diving straight after getting a tattoo into something that would soil swimming trunks on beaches around the world. It's the film that would show the studios the power of a summer blockbuster and a portent of how movies would be released and marketed in the future. But really, it just made so much money that the idea of a sequel to a film with a title creature that ended the movie as a collection of very small bits did not seem like a particularly bad idea. For a long time, sequels were treated by studios as lesser movies. They usually made less money than the original, so they'd often be made with cheaper talent and on a smaller budget. But if you got the economics right, you could turn a healthy profit. Jaws 2 would see the beginning of a different trend, a sequel that would cost a lot more than the original, and yet still be profitable enough to continue the series.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water.
Jaws 2 would continue the story on from Jaws. Just Jaws.
I have had some experience with sharks.
What have you?
A few years after the great white shark attacks around Amity, Chief Martin Brody has settled into his life on the island. His wife Lorraine works with a local property developer, Lynn Peterson. Their kids, Mike and Sean, are a little older, and Amity is humming along nicely as a tourist town. One that was, on the whole, not very sharky. Then things start to happen. There's an abandoned boat, a half-eaten killer whale is found, a boat explodes, there are people missing, and bodies are found. Chief Brody starts to think they might just have a shark on their hands. His earlier experience with the great white has made him a little paranoid, to the point where he discharges his weapon on a public beach during a false alarm, and he's fired. The local teens all seem to love messing about in boats. I mean, people aren't really swimming as much in this movie, but there's a lot for the boating enthusiast, just so long as you don't mind seeing a boat destroyed by a really, really big fish with a bad attitude. Mike and Sean Brody are a little older, but their dad bans them from going out on the water. Mike, however, succumbs to peer pressure and will take his brother along with his friends for a jaunt on his sailboat. This great white shark will eat anything and everything. Basically, the waters around Amity are the shark equivalent of a smorgasbord. It will all end with Chief Brody luring the shark into biting a power cable. Jaws 2 is a decent enough shark movie with almost every one of the ingredients that people loved about the first film appearing again. It's set in the same location and features most of the original cast. It still has John Williams handling the score, but it's just lacking something from the first movie. First and foremost, it's missing Steven Spielberg as director.
Sharks don't take things personally, Mr. Brody.
Almost as soon as the first film started making so much money that it was a good time to buy stock in any company that produced popcorn-related products, the idea of a Jaws sequel was, unlike the Orca, floated.
Oh, bullshit.
Bullshit!
The original film's producers, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, agreed to set up a sequel and canvassed participants of the first movie. Steven Spielberg's response amounted to, "New phone, who dis?" He hated the experience of working on that first movie, and by now was deep into Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Roy Scheider also hadn't wanted to do a sequel, but was eventually persuaded by a very large fee that, if it were printed on a suitably oversized novelty check, would have choked the giant shark. Pro tip, if you do want to use oversized novelty checks to deal with a great white, endorse the check first. Scheider's agreement to appear in the movie would also sort out some legal disputes that he'd had with Universal. Lorraine Gary returns as Ellen Brody. Many of the people playing smaller roles in the first movie would return, though in Jaws franchise tradition, different actors would play the Brody boys Mike and Sean. One character who had survived the first movie but is only mentioned in passing in the sequel was shark expert Matt Hooper. Richard Dreyfuss was not available as he was busy pursuing his lifelong interest of spending copious amounts of time with his head wedged up his ass.
It's just a theory that I happen to agree with.
Apart from Joseph Mascolo, most of the new cast members will be playing the various teenagers in the film. And there are a lot of teenagers in this movie where they all seem to blend into each other. They ignore warnings and get into all sorts of kooky situations, not least of which was being stalked by a giant shark. Jaws 2 ends up more like a PG-rated slasher movie, just one with a shark as a maniacal killer, rather than somebody who made for an easier Halloween costume. Howard Sackler had written the original script, and John D. Hancock was hired to direct. Shooting began with Martha's Vineyard again standing in for Amity Island. However, after a few weeks of filming, the producers grew unhappy with the way the film was being shot, leading to Hancock being fired. His replacement was French director Jeannot Schwartz, who'd done a lot of television work and had also helmed a few features. Production shut down for a few weeks as the production moved to Florida, and during this time the script would be reworked on location by Carl Gottlieb to make things a little lighter. However, that also meant that a lot of the production was effectively on hold until Gottlieb had completed enough scenes. Schwartz in the meantime concentrated on filming live-action set pieces. If that was meant to be the end of production difficulties, well, that clearly didn't work out.
What else?
Schwartz and Scheider got on about as well as a Molotov cocktail does with a barbecue. Things got to the point of a physical altercation between director and star. After things were straightened out, filming did continue, but what we ended up with was a decent, if not especially outstanding film. The end result, unlike the shark in the film, doesn't have much spark.
It's a power line!
The eventual ending is telegraphed more than Wells Fargo. The climax is set on an island called Cable Junction, where of course there's a high-tension cable. This island was actually a set built on a floating barge. And whether it's just the way it was blocked out or it's shot, it does look like a lot of the action in the climax takes place remarkably close to the shore. The mechanical shark used in the sequel did of course cause problems during filming, but then it does mostly look better on screen than the shark from the first movie. There were also live sharks again filmed by Ron and Valerie Taylor.
You'll see.
Jaws 2 is decent, but it's not a patch on the previous film. It was made on a budget more than double the first movie, something like $20 to $30 million. On its release in 1978, it took in $200 million at the box office, which was of course far less than the first movie, but it was still enough money to choke an entire shiver of sharks with giant novelty checks. Now, with a box office return like that, it looks as though this Jaws thing has legs. Well, not literally.
Was it the shark?
In 1983, another Jaws film landed, this time with very few people associated with either of the first two movies involved.
Move the fish!
Jaws 3D. Yes, a 3D movie released as part of a short-lived wave of 3D movies in the early 80s, hence Jaws 3D. Now that's a title that makes a little bit of sense until you get to home video and television, in which case sometimes you'll see it as Jaws 3. An early pitch had looked at making this a parody movie, but that fell apart when too many people thought it was a bad idea, like using the Hindenburg to transport the Olympic flame across the Atlantic.
Holy shit!
Alan Landsberg's company acquired the rights to produce a Jaws film. He'd of course been a prolific producer of documentaries, one of which was the 70s classic In Search Of.
To seek out the great white shark.
In the 80s, his company would produce more scripted fare with projects like Jaws 3D.
We're underwater!
Which of course does assume that there was a script somewhere.
All right, I'll have my beeper beep your beeper.
I'll have my beeper back.
So we have Mike Brody, who's somehow aged about 10 years in less than 5. I mean, maybe being targeted by giant sharks will do that. He's helped build Marine Park SeaWorld, though he's just been offered a job somewhere else. His girlfriend, Dr. Caine Morgan, is a marine biologist who trains dolphins. Mike's younger brother, Sean, is now a cowboy who hates going into the water for some inexplicable reason. Though the idea of a hookup with water skier Kellyanne will get him to take a dip. The park's owner, Calvin Bouchard, brings in his buddy, the adventurer Fitzroyce, and well, just look at all of these characters. But very basically, a shark gets into the marine park and starts eating people. But because the film is a 3D movie, we have lots of bits of body parts floating around for that 3D effect. Fitzroyce initially wants to hunt the shark down. Kay wants to capture it and add it to the park. I wanted to turn this movie off and go and watch something else, but nobody gets what they want.
Come on, you're enjoying this.
No, I'm not.
The shark dies, but after another mangled body is found, Kay realizes that it is too late to call her insurance company to upgrade her policy to include bloody big shark coverage.
Our shark couldn't have killed Overman. Its mother did.
Fitzroyce's plan to hunt the big shark goes off swimmingly. For the shark. Meanwhile, an undersea attraction at the park brings the big shark, and things are not looking good for the park attendees who find themselves trapped underwater. Kay and Mike go underwater and eventually manage to use one of Fitzroy's underwater grenades to blow up the shark in 3D. It's got 3 dimensions, yet not one of them made it into the script. Jaws 3D is a popcorn flick about a shark loose in a marine park. A marine park that, for some reason, is named after the actual marine park SeaWorld and filmed at the actual Florida park that it was meant to be set in. I honestly don't know what SeaWorld got out of the deal.
I can guarantee you media coverage.
Come to SeaWorld, drink, be merry, be eaten.
Well, I don't know if it's occurred to any of you all, but...
Still, it is only the second least flattering movie about SeaWorld.
But is the film okay?
While I love the idea of a shark attack in a theme park, Jaws 3D ends up with some ordinary execution, with some of the most gimmicky looking 3D effects ever. However, at no point does Simon MacCorkindale ever turn into a shark.
Manimal.
Jaws 3D has lots of little events that sometimes go somewhere interesting, but no, I tell a lie. It's not particularly interesting.
So take me to dinner.
All right, let's try sushi. I'll change.
It's not so bad that you would weep for mankind, but it really is nothing special. Director Joe Alves had been a production designer on the first 2 Jaws films and an associate producer and second unit director on Jaws 2. His direction here is solid rather than outstanding, but by now the idea of Spielberg-level vision is well and truly off the table. Gordon Trueblood came up with the original story, with the legendary writer Richard Matheson churning out a script that was later rewritten by Carl Gottlieb. The studio had insisted on making 2 of the characters the sons of Martin and Ellen Brody from the first 2 movies, despite the sudden growth spurt and accelerated schooling that would be needed to make this workable to pedants. Bess Armstrong and Dennis Quaid headlined the movie, though Quaid would later say how he spent the entire film high on cocaine. I mean, you don't say, it never shows. Both Mike and Sean are again played by different actors, and they're a lot more southern. Maybe they just spent a lot of time in the southern part of Massachusetts. Louis Gossett Jr. appears as the park's owner Calvin. Simon MacCorkindale was Fitzroyce, and in one of her earliest movie roles, Leah Thompson was Kellyanne Bukowski. Is Jaws 3D egregiously bad? No, just fairly mediocre, like an egg salad sandwich from a broken vending machine that hasn't been plugged into the wall socket for a week.
Now that's world news.
There's a chance it will make you feel off, if only for the amount of unconvincing blue screen effects. I mean, unconvincing effects in a Jaws movie are kind of part of the deal. The prop sharks look fine much of the time, though like other films, the effect will diminish the more you see it. There are a number of optically composited shots that do look obvious and ordinary. Usually they're part of some fancy 3D hero shot, but they have dated worse than those dodgy egg salad sandwiches from the broken vending machine. The 3D effect may enhance the enjoyment of the film, but most of the time, if you feel like doing penance and watching this movie as some sort of punishment, you'll likely be watching it in 2D. The bulk of the 3D work used a process where the 2 images were displayed separately on one frame of film, where ideally, all those bits of shark guts flying towards you would make you jump out of your seat. I mean, Jaws 3 does do what it says on the tin. It's a Jaws 3D movie. But nowhere on the tin does it mention, not even in the small print, that it's also a pretty mediocre film. I mean, that's perhaps not kind, but it is accurate. It cost less to make than Jaws 2, yet still turned a healthy profit when released in the summer of 1983. So that meant there was at least some appetite for another movie set in the Brodyverse. A few years later, Universal needed something reliable to cover a run of poorly performing movies, and so the studio, hoping for miracles, fast-tracked another Jaws film to be ready for 1987. Jaws: The Revenge was the result, and this one goes places. It's a little darker before it gets silly, but always remains just a little dark, and all through this movie, you are thinking to yourself, that guy is now Sir Michael Caine. I mean, Michael Caine is in a Jaws movie, and he plays a character called Hoagie. Michael Caine is Hoagie.
Sharks don't commit murder. They don't pick out a person.
It picked out Sean. It killed your father.
Jaws: The Revenge exists in a world where Jaws 3D did not happen, which doesn't sound like a bad place until of course you realise that makes the story in Jaws: The Revenge possible. Lorraine Gary returns as Ellen Brody, her husband had only recently died of a heart attack, and her youngest son Sean is a deputy on Amity Island. Just before Christmas, he responds to a routine call and ends up being killed by a giant shark. A grief-stricken Ellen Brody travels to the Bahamas with her other son Michael, his artist wife Carla, and their daughter. There she meets the pilot Hoagie.
You go like this, and the houses get bigger.
As an actor, Michael Caine was never out of favour. He was always being offered good roles, but every now and then there was a bag to be got. And with Jaws the Revenge, Michael Caine got that bag.
Just saying that maybe there are other possibilities.
Michael Caine was once asked about the movie. He said he'd never seen it and heard it wasn't very good, but he saw the house that it paid for and it was terrific. Caine would also win an Academy Award during the production of this movie, so taking on a trashy gig for the cash didn't seem to bother the actor.
Don't worry, the nightmares will go away.
Hoagie and Ellen will bond and they'll fall for each other. The thing they seem to have in common, Ellen is obsessed with killer homing sharks and Hoagie is obsessed with trying to make her forget about the sharks that are systematically trying to eat her family. Meanwhile, Michael and his buddy Jake, played by Mario Van Peebles, have a research grant where they place tags on snails. But hey, wouldn't it be more interesting if we could, just spitballing here, study a really big shark? So, do you know where we can find one? To cut a long story short, Ellen is convinced that A, the shark somehow killed her husband of a heart attack, B, the shark that killed Sean wanted revenge, and C, the shark that killed Sean has tracked her to the Bahamas.
Oh, shit!
This film is also mainly played quite seriously, with just a little bit of lightheartedness in the Bahamas.
I've always wanted to make love to an angry welder.
The absurdity of the film's basic premise is what often dooms it to appear on lists of the worst movies of all time. Now, I actively try to avoid the worst movies of all time, but since I did start this misadventure into the Jaws sequels, I just had to finish it.
I'm scared shitless.
The shark does whatever sharks normally do in a Jaws movie, but this one doesn't really get around to killing a lot of people. There are a few near misses, which drives Ellen to go hunting the shark. The producer and director of this movie, Joseph Sargent, had an enviable career as an award-winning director, where he directed episodic television, TV movies and miniseries going back to series like Star Trek and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. However, he was experienced enough to realise that he'd drawn the short straw on this assignment, one that would eventually see him subsequently concentrate on television work.
I had to do it. There was nothing else to do.
In the first 3 Jaws movies, the thing that will eventually kill the shark is set up ahead of time. Air tanks, a power cable, a grenade. In The Revenge, Ellen rams a boat into the shark to kill it, and depending on when and where you saw the film, the shark will also explode.
This is so silly.
The original theatrical release saw Jake being killed, and Ellen Brody, the shark hunter, merely impaled the shark by ramming her boat into it. But audiences didn't like that, and so some hurried reshoots saw Jake survive, and the shark now explodes when it's impaled by the boat. I mean, I do completely sympathise. I can sometimes feel like that after a heavy meal. Jaws the Revenge tries to do something a little different, if not entirely successfully. It expects its cast to act as if they were in a tearjerker drama rather than a monster movie. The movie cannot decide whether it's a serious treatise on grief,
It came for him.
or a horror movie about a killer psychic shark hell-bent on revenge. The pretense of seriousness makes it not as obviously silly as Jaws 3D, but it's still very, very silly, and not necessarily in a good way, like a schnauzer who's been nipping at the schnapps. Man, that Pookie has a serious problem. So I get the impression that people who seemed a little embarrassed about making a movie about a killer shark ended up making a really embarrassing movie about a killer shark. Jaws the Revenge was released in 1987 to lousy reviews, Razzie nominations, and its box office would barely hit the break-even point. To date, this proved to be the end of the line for the franchise.
Sharks come and go, Ellen. People have got nothing to do with it.
Killer shark movies would eventually start to trickle back to multiplexes many years later, some marketed as thrillers, and others would make Jaws the Revenge look like highbrow drama. None, of course, would have the famous name or the music. The third and fourth movies had music by other composers, though wisely they did at least retain some of John Williams' score for the shark. As such, that's where the Jaws story ended, and mercifully, that's where this video has to end. Maybe we have been a bit sharkastic on the last 2 in particular, but sometimes it's the only way to cope. While the mechanical sharks may have gotten better with each film, the reception to each new release did not improve. I mean, it's very easy to rank the Jaws franchise by quality by just putting them in chronological order. The original is the GOAT. Jaws 2 is the son of the GOAT. It's not as great as the GOAT, but you can still see the family resemblance.
You're jumping over a shark. On nothing, on a couple of little skis.
Jaws 3D is just a silly popcorn flick, and Jaws the Revenge is a film that seems to totally miss the point of what it's meant to be, much like wearing socks with sandals. I do think you can get a kernel of entertainment from a film that doesn't work. I mean, it's not meant to be shark's beer.
I can't keep doing this.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below or check out some of our other videos.